Subscribe, like, and comment if you're ready to step into a place the system never wanted you to see. Because once you enter this story, there's no easy way out. The first siren cut through the Colorado night at 2:17 a.m., echoing off the rock walls like a warning shot. Snow whipped across the empty highway as state troopers chased a black SUV weaving through the darkness, its headlights off, its driver clearly unconcerned with being caught. The radio crackled with urgency. Federal units were already en route. This wasn't a robbery suspect. This wasn't a drug runner. This was something else. When the SUV finally spun out near a closed rest stop, the driver didn't run. He stepped out slowly, hands raised, face calm, almost relieved. His name would not appear in the morning papers. His charges would not be discussed in public courtrooms. And within 48 hours, he would be on a flight that did not show up on any passenger manifest. That was the moment the case quietly began. 3 miles away, behind layers of concrete and steel carved into the mountains, the most secure prison in America waited. ADX Florence did not announce arrivals. There were no gates swinging open, no lines of guards with rifles raised. The facility absorbed people the way the earth absorbs rain, silently, completely, without giving anything back. To the outside world, it was a prison. To the federal system, it was a last resort. Special Agent Daniel Mercer stood on the tarmac as the prisoner was transferred from the SUV to a transport van. Mercer had worked counterterrorism for nearly 2 decades. He had seen bomb sites, interrogation rooms, and courtrooms full of victims' families. But this assignment felt different. The man in custody wasn't shouting. He wasn't resisting. He simply watched Mercer with an expression that suggested patience. Mercer looked away first. The file in Mercer's hands was thin, almost suspiciously so. No full criminal history. No photographs beyond a single grainy image taken years earlier. The charges were classified under multiple sealed statutes. All Mercer knew for certain was that 2 federal facilities had refused to house the man. Another had requested an emergency transfer after a guard suffered a breakdown, insisting the inmate knew things he shouldn't. ADX Florence had accepted him without hesitation. By sunrise, the man was gone, swallowed by the mountains. 2 days later, the first body was found. It was a federal contractor, discovered inside his home in Pueblo, Colorado. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no theft. He had been sitting at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee still warm beside him, when his heart stopped. The coroner would later rule it natural causes, but something didn't sit right with the responding officers. The man's laptop was open. Every file had been wiped clean, including backups stored on external drives. Security cameras inside the house had been disabled, not smashed, but shut down with precision. When Agent Mercer received the report, his stomach tightened. The contractor had worked prison logistics. Specifically, he had been assigned to review operational redundancies at ADX Florence. The connection was too neat to be coincidence. Mercer drove south that afternoon, the mountains looming larger with every mile. ADX Florence emerged from the landscape like a fortress from a nightmare. Low, angular buildings pressed against the earth, designed not to dominate the horizon, but to disappear into it. There were no watchtowers in the traditional sense. Surveillance was embedded everywhere, unseen and constant. Inside, the air felt heavier. Warden Ellen Graves met Mercer in a small, windowless conference room. She had run the facility for 7 years and had learned not to waste words. "You're here because of the new arrival," she said. "I'm here because someone connected to this place is dead," Mercer replied. Graves didn't flinch. "That won't be the last time." She slid a folder across the table. Inside was the intake report for the inmate transferred 2 nights earlier. Name redacted. Background redacted. Even the psychological profile was partially sealed. But what remained visible was enough to unsettle Mercer. Highly intelligent. Extreme patience. Advanced understanding of institutional behavior. Documented ability to manipulate individuals without direct contact. "He hasn't spoken to anyone," Graves said. "Not guards. Not medical staff. Not chaplains. He follows every rule, exactly as written. Then why is he here? Mercer asked. Graves leaned back, folding her arms. Because every place he's been, something happens. Mercer toured the facility under escort, passing cell after cell designed for isolation. Each inmate lived alone, ate alone, exercised alone. Human contact was minimized by design. ADX Florence wasn't about punishment. It was about control. Yet, as Mercer reviewed surveillance logs and staff reports, a pattern began to emerge. Small incidents. A guard requesting a transfer after claiming an inmate knew his childhood nickname. A maintenance worker refusing to enter a specific corridor, citing a panic attack with no clear trigger. An analyst resigning abruptly after a routine audit. None of it was dramatic enough to trigger alarms on its own. Together, it felt like something spreading quietly. That night, Mercer stayed at a motel in Florence, staring at the ceiling as the wind rattled the windows. He replayed the calm face of the man stepping out of the SUV, the sense that he had been expecting this outcome, that being sent to the most secure prison in the world was not a defeat, but a move. The second death came 3 days later. This time, it was a Bureau of Prison psychologist, found in her office after hours. No trauma. No forced entry. Her notes were missing. Specifically, her evaluations related to high-risk inmate transfers. The building's access logs showed no unauthorized entries. She had been alone. Mercer felt the clock start ticking. Federal leadership wanted containment. Quiet reviews. Internal audits. No leaks. The public could not know that something or someone inside ADX Florence might be exerting influence beyond its walls. Mercer wasn't convinced influence was the right word. He requested access to the inmate. Graves denied it immediately. You don't sit across from him, she said. No one does. Then how do you know what he's capable of? Mercer asked. Graves' expression hardened. Because the people who tried to understand him are dead. Instead, Mercer was given access to archived materials, communications logs, behavioral analyses, and sealed transcripts from previous facilities. It took hours before he noticed the anomaly. In every institution the inmate had passed through, there was a gap. A period of time where records were incomplete, not missing entirely, but fragmented, as if deliberately obscured. And in every gap, there was a death. Not always violent. Not always suspicious on paper. Heart attacks. Accidents. Suicides ruled inconclusive. The inmate was never directly linked. But he was always there. Mercer returned to ADX Florence the next morning, snow crunching under his boots as he walked toward the administrative wing. Something had shifted overnight. Guards moved with tighter formations. Radios stayed closer to their mouths. The prison felt alert, like an animal sensing a threat it couldn't see. Graves met him again, her voice low. We had an incident. She led him to a secure monitoring room. On the screen, Mercer saw footage from a corridor outside the inmate cell. A guard stood motionless, staring at the reinforced door. He had been there for nearly 7 minutes, unmoving, before another officer approached and gently touched his shoulder. The guard collapsed. Medical evaluations would later determine acute psychological shock. The guard couldn't explain what happened. He only repeated one sentence over and over. He told me I'd already made my choice. There was no audio, Graves said. No communication system activated. The inmate never left his cell. Mercer stared at the screen, a chill creeping up his spine. He doesn't need to speak, Mercer said quietly. He needs to be understood. Graves shook her head. That's what worries me. Late that evening, as Mercer prepared to leave the facility, an encrypted alert flashed on his phone. Another death. This one closer than before. A federal data analyst assigned to ADX Florence oversight had been found in his car on the side of the road. Cause of death pending. But what caught Mercer's attention was the location. Less than a mile from the prison. Mercer stood in the cold, looking back at the concrete silhouette of ADX Florence against the darkening sky. Somewhere inside, a man sat alone in a cell designed to cut him off from the world. And yet, The world around him was beginning to unravel. When investigators searched the analyst's vehicle, they found a single item left behind, placed deliberately on the passenger seat. A printed intake number. The same one assigned to the inmate who had arrived without a name. But when they tried to pull his full file from the system, they discovered something far more disturbing. The original record didn't list him as a transfer. It listed him as a return. And when they opened the sealed appendix attached to his file, what they found changed everything. By the time dawn broke over the Rockies, Agent Daniel Mercer had already read the sealed appendix 3 times. The word return sat in his mind like a loaded weapon. In the federal system, inmates were transferred, upgraded, downgraded. But returned implied something far rarer. Someone who had already passed through ADX Florence once before and, against every expectation, had been released. ADX was not a place you left. The appendix was dated almost 15 years earlier. Most of it was redacted, but the fragments that remained were unsettling enough. The inmate had originally entered the system under a different identity, connected to a multi-state investigation involving organized crime, financial sabotage, and the quiet destabilization of institutions. The case never went to trial. Key witnesses recanted. Evidence chains collapsed. 2 prosecutors resigned within weeks of each other. Then the inmate vanished from federal records. Until now, Mercer returned to the prison under emergency authorization. Warden Ellen Graves was already waiting, her composure cracking for the first time since he'd met her. "We ran a full audit overnight," she said, her voice tight. "Someone accessed historical data blocks that haven't been touched in a decade. They didn't break in. They logged in." "From where?" Mercer asked. Graves hesitated. "From inside." They moved quickly through the corridors, passing cell blocks sealed behind reinforced doors. The silence felt oppressive, punctuated only by the distant hum of ventilation systems. ADX Florence was designed to eliminate unpredictability. Every movement was scheduled, every interaction controlled. And yet, something had slipped through the design. In the intelligence room, analysts projected timelines across the wall. Deaths, resignations, system anomalies, all aligned with the inmate's presence in previous facilities. The pattern was undeniable now. "He doesn't order violence," Mercer said, studying the data. "He creates conditions where people destroy themselves." Graves nodded grimly. "We believe he studies systems the way others study people. He finds pressure points, weaknesses, fear. And then," Mercer asked, "and then he waits." That afternoon, a lockdown was initiated. Non-essential staff were cleared from the facility. Communications were restricted to encrypted internal channels only. ADX Florence became what it was always meant to be, an island. Yet the inmate at the center of it all remained perfectly compliant. Mercer requested a psychological profile review with Dr. Lena Hart, one of the few specialists cleared to analyze high-risk inmates without direct contact. Hart was brilliant, meticulous, and visibly shaken. "He doesn't fit conventional categories," she said, flipping through digital files. "No explosive anger. No impulsivity. He doesn't seek control through dominance." "Then, how does he control people?" Mercer asked. Hart paused. "By understanding them better than they understand themselves." She explained that during his first incarceration, the inmate had never threatened anyone. He asked questions, small, precise ones, about procedures, about routines, about stress. Guards and staff didn't even realize they were answering until later. Over time, he learned who felt trapped, who felt guilty, who felt afraid of being exposed. "He reflects their fears back at them," Hart said. "Not directly. Subtly. A look, a phrase, a pause. Enough to make them spiral." Mercer thought of the guard frozen outside the cell. The analyst's car parked so close to the prison. The contractors wiped files. "What's his motive?" Mercer asked. Hart shook her head. "That's the most disturbing part. There's no financial gain. No ideological statement. It's almost experimental." That evening, Mercer received a message through an internal channel marked urgent. A junior systems engineer had gone missing inside the facility. Last seen entering a restricted maintenance corridor beneath cell block D. That corridor led directly beneath the inmate cell. Mercer and Graves descended with a tactical team, their footsteps echoing through concrete tunnels rarely used. The air was colder here, the lights dimmer. They found the engineer slumped against a wall, alive but unresponsive, eyes wide open. When he finally spoke, hours later in the medical wing, his words sent a ripple of fear through everyone listening. "He told me I didn't have to keep pretending," the engineer whispered. "He said he knew what I'd done." No further explanation followed. The engineer resigned before sunrise. Pressure mounted from Washington. Some officials pushed for immediate isolation escalation, cutting the inmate off even further. Others argued for relocation. But there was nowhere left to send him. ADX Florence was the end of the line. Late that night, Mercer reviewed surveillance footage again, slowing it frame by frame. He noticed something no one else had caught. The inmate's daily schedule never changed, but the reactions around him did. People lingered longer near his cell, hesitated, looked back. He wasn't reaching out. They were drifting closer. Mercer made a decision that would define the rest of the case. He requested permission to review the inmate's original release order from 15 years earlier. What he found stunned him. The release had not been ordered by a judge. It had been authorized by an internal federal committee that no longer officially existed. A committee tasked with assessing non-traditional threat actors. People who couldn't be prosecuted, only managed. And according to the final memo, the inmate had not been deemed safe to release. He had been deemed necessary. Before Mercer could process that implication, alarms blared through the facility. Not a riot alarm, not a breach, a systems alert. One by one, internal cameras went dark, not all of them, just enough to create blind spots. Doors remained locked, cells sealed. The prison was secure, but no longer fully visible. Mercer and Graves exchanged a look that needed no words. "He planned this," Mercer said. "And we walked him right back in," Graves replied. As technicians scrambled to restore feeds, Mercer's phone vibrated with another encrypted alert. A new death. This one different. A federal oversight official, found inside a hotel room in Denver. On the desk beside him, a handwritten note. 3 words, written carefully. "Still observing behavior." Mercer felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. This was no longer about containing a dangerous inmate. It was about understanding why the system had once decided to let him go, and what he had been doing ever since. As Mercer turned back toward the cell block, unaware eyes watching from behind reinforced glass, one terrifying realization took shape. ADX Florence hadn't trapped him. It had brought him home. The first thing Agent Daniel Mercer realized was that ADX Florence had stopped behaving like a prison. It was still locked down. Cells remained sealed. Guards followed protocol down to the second. Yet beneath the rigid order, something else had taken hold. A quiet, corrosive influence moving through the system like a slow infection. The federal oversight death forced Washington to act. A crisis task force descended on Colorado within hours, bringing analysts, behavioral experts, and legal advisors who spoke in carefully chosen phrases and avoided eye contact with Mercer. They knew more than they were saying. Worse, they knew why. In a windowless briefing room, Mercer was finally given access to the classified archive. The committee that authorized the inmate's release 15 years earlier had been unofficial, temporary, and deliberately untraceable. Its purpose wasn't justice. It was containment of a different kind. The inmate, known internally only as Subject Null, wasn't considered dangerous because of violence. He was dangerous because of influence. Before his first incarceration, entire criminal networks had collapsed without a single arrest. Financial institutions unraveled due to internal sabotage. Law enforcement units turned on each other over fabricated leaks and planted suspicions. Subject Null never issued orders. He created doubt, and doubt did the rest. He doesn't escape systems, one analyst said quietly. He studies them until they destroy themselves. The committee's conclusion had been chillingly pragmatic. Subject Null functioned best inside controlled environments. Letting him circulate freely had been a mistake, but locking him away permanently carried a different risk. He learns faster when isolated, the report read. He adapts. ADX Florence had been designed to neutralize chaos. Ironically, it was the perfect laboratory. As Mercer absorbed this, a second incident unfolded inside the prison. A veteran guard, 20 years of spotless service, was found sitting motionless in a staff restroom, refusing to speak. No injuries. No note. Just one phrase scribbled repeatedly on a paper towel. He already knows. Mercer demanded direct authorization to confront Subject Null. The request was denied within minutes. You don't interrogate him, a senior official warned. You observe. Any engagement gives him data. But Mercer understood something they didn't. Subject Null was no longer observing. He was concluding. The next system failure was deliberate, not catastrophic, just precise. Meal delivery routes were subtly altered. Recreation schedules shifted by seconds. Small enough to go unnoticed individually, devastating when combined. Guards second-guessed instructions. Supervisors argued over authority. Trust eroded. ADX Florence began turning inward. Dr. Lena Hart was the next to disappear, not physically, but professionally. Her psychological access was revoked without explanation. When Mercer confronted her, she looked relieved. I think he's finished with me, she said. That's worse than it sounds. She explained that Subject Null had stopped responding to evaluations entirely. No questions. No reactions. No engagement. That means he's no longer collecting information, Hart said. He already has what he needs. Mercer reviewed surveillance from Subject Null's cell again. The man sat perfectly still, eyes unfocused, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then Mercer noticed the pattern. Subject Null's stillness always preceded a system event. A resignation, a failure, a death. He wasn't reacting to the prison. The prison was reacting to him. Mercer took a risk no one else would. He accessed legacy federal records buried deep beneath classified firewalls. Names long forgotten. Careers quietly ended. Oversight officials who had once been part of the committee. Every single one had suffered a professional or personal collapse within 5 years of Subject Null's release. Except one. A former analyst named Richard Holloway. Holloway had vanished from federal service and resurfaced as a private consultant specializing in institutional risk management. He now worked for multiple government agencies, including, quietly, the Bureau of Prisons. ADX Florence. Mercer confronted him during a closed-door security review. You helped release him, Mercer said. Holloway didn't deny it. We thought we could predict him. You thought you could use him, Mercer replied. Holloway sighed. We thought exposure to uncontrolled systems would burn him out. Instead, he refined himself. The truth finally emerged. Subject Null wasn't placed in ADX Florence because he was too dangerous for other prisons. He was placed there because he was too effective everywhere else. ADX wasn't a cage. It was containment for something that couldn't be prosecuted, negotiated with, or understood in time. As Mercer left the meeting, alarms echoed again, not failures this time, but compliance alerts. Doors unlocking exactly as scheduled. Systems correcting themselves. Order was returning. Too perfectly. In the control room, analysts stared at their screens in confusion. Every anomaly had stopped simultaneously. Mercer knew what that meant. Subject Null was done. He walked to the observation corridor outside the cell. Through reinforced glass, he saw the inmate standing for the first time since his arrival. Subject Null looked directly at the camera, then slightly past it toward Mercer. A guard's voice crackled over the intercom. Sir, he's requested medical evaluation. That's impossible, Graves said. He's never made a request. Mercer's phone buzzed with a final alert. Another death. Richard Holloway. Found alone in his home office. No signs of struggle. No note. Just a single document left open on his computer. A resignation letter addressed to no one. Subject Null was returned to his cell without incident. Systems normalized. Personnel stabilized. The prison breathed again. Official reports concluded the events were coincidental. Stress-related failures. Administrative oversight. ADX Florence resumed its role as the end of the line. But Mercer couldn't shake the last classified memo uploaded to his terminal that night. A recommendation: not to move subject null, not to isolate him further, but to leave him exactly where he was. Observation ongoing. As Mercer shut down the terminal, he realized the most terrifying truth of all. ADX Florence hadn't broken subject null. It had given him the one thing he needed: time. And somewhere beyond the concrete walls and silent corridors, systems were already adjusting to his influence, slowly, invisibly, and inevitably. They thought the most dangerous man in America was locked away. But danger didn't need to escape anymore. It had already learned how to stay. And if this story pulled you into the shadows and left you uneasy, remember, there are darker cases still waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe, because the next one is even closer to home.